Today on Inside Utah Politics, the GOP special election primary in Utah's 2nd Congressional District. We're checking in with all the candidates today. Becky Edwards and Bruce Huff are here to make their pitch to you, the voter. Plus, President Biden calling on Congress to approve billions in spending when they return from recess. Reaction to that request coming from the White House.
Time now for Inside Utah Politics.
Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Glenn Mills. It is time to go inside Utah politics. We do begin this morning with Becky Edwards, congressional candidate in Utah's 2nd Congressional District. Becky, welcome back to the show. You've been here many times. Always good to have you with us.
Good to be here. Thanks.
All right. You are one of 3 candidates on the primary ballot for the GOP nomination. Let's talk first about your background and resume. What is it that you feel qualifies you for this position?
I think it really comes down to experience. I'm lived in this district 30 years. 10 of those years I served my neighbors and folks around my area in the Utah House from 2009 to 2018. And I think that track record of being able to get things done as a common sense conservative really is something that's resonating around the district, that is huge and brings people from urban and rural parts of the state together. But the thing that really is unifying people, I think, is this desire to see that kind of approach to leadership and knowing for certain that someone has done it before. It's what we need more of in D.C.
When you take a look at D.C. today, it's politically charged. You look at that job and you think that is going to be difficult. So what is it that interests you in trying to take on that challenge?
I think I've always been solutions oriented in my personal, professional life as a marriage and family therapist, and then in my political world too, taking complex issues and not being afraid to try and tackle those, but working to bring people together for solutions. And the very fact that most Americans look at Congress right now and think, man, there's a lot of room to improve. This is broken. That's
a nice way to put it.
I think that's probably true, but that's the very reason why I want to be in there to take the skill set and mindset that I had in the Utah House. I think we need more of Utah in D.C.
That's what I was going to ask you. What did you learn here that you think can translate over to D.C.?
I think the power of individual experiences and perspectives, and that people across the political spectrum really have an important voice. And this is within a large Republican Party. This is people of all locations, geography, and life experiences that together we can actually do some amazing things. This is why, as the chair of the Economic Development and Workforce Services, for example, for 6 years in the Utah House, I was able to help work on issues around education and workforce that made a difference across this district and kept Utah as one of the strongest economies in the country.
When you take a look at how the state legislature works, a vast majority of bills do pass with bipartisan support. That's not the case in Washington, D.C. So when you come against that different mindset in Washington, how do you try to push for that and work together as a party? Because, like I said, you don't really see a lot of that right now.
I think a lot of that work really is done in committees, and that's where you have an opportunity to build trust with your colleagues, help folks work on things that are important to them, get to know the issues, build relationships that then help garner support for issues that matter here at home. And I think that's something that over and over I did here in the House as a Republican from Davis County, and I think it's the very same model that is going to be effective in D.C.
Since you brought up committees, I'm curious, what are some of the committees you would eye as the most important to sit on and be able to represent your constituents here at home?
Well, there are so many issues that are important here to Utah, but I've got 3 or 4 that I'm eyeing eventually to get positioned on those. Of course, armed services is something so important here. Hill Air Force Base, but also right here in CD2, Dugway Proving Ground, the test and training base, and the depot. These are all things that matter tremendously for our national defense. So armed services is important. Natural resources, with being such a public land state, is important. Appropriations, which I think has such an important role trying to rein in this disastrous spending that we see. And financial services. We're 6th largest banking state in the country, and having some support in that sector would really help our state economically.
Okay, you already hit on this in some of the other topics we've discussed, but I want to talk about what your top priorities would be. You mentioned the committees you'd like to sit on, you mentioned some of the issues with spending, but as far as bills and legislation are concerned, what would be some of your top priorities to get working on right away if you were elected?
I think for me, as I've been out and around this district, the things I'm hearing from families and individuals across the district are really spending. It's things are just too expensive right now. It has to do with inflation. It has to do with reckless spending from Congress. They hold the purse strings, and it impacts all of us. And it's back to school week. You know, when I see families at stores buying school supplies, and I know that things are tight for them, but it's regular things too, groceries, gas. We need to have someone in Congress who's actually balanced a budget. I did that 10 times here in Utah, and I came into the legislature in 2009, right at the height of the recession. This was not easy. Just because we do it over and over in Utah does not mean it's easy. We need someone who's committed to do that hard work in committees of reining in the budget and being able to really keep in mind pocketbooks of everyday Americans.
You mentioned you balance a budget every year in the state of Utah. It's been decades since we've seen that on the national level. Do you have hope that we can get to that point?
I think we can. There is really a movement, I think, certainly across constituents and people across this district who are supporting our campaign, and they're coming to this campaign saying, we want someone who has done this before. We want someone who we know has the skill set to get this ball rolling in D.C. And I think it's not going to happen overnight, but that tenacity to work on big issues, little by little, we can get there.
In 2020, some of the delegates that you talked to at convention and whatnot brought this up as a concern. In 2020, you were pretty vocal about your support and who you were going to support for president. Talk about why you came to that decision and whether it was the right one or not.
Well, I was elected 5 times as a Republican from Davis County by Republican delegates. And in fact, in my last election in 2016, I got 70% of the delegate vote. These are solid Republicans in a solid Republican district. And when I went to the legislature, I worked on issues on their behalf, conservative issues, and I just felt it was such a privilege to represent my district as a Republican over and over and over and see folks continue to actually grow support through my service and seeing issues and votes and bills that I worked on.
How do you rate President Biden as a president during his time?
I'll tell you what I'm looking for right now in terms of the upcoming presidential election. I'm looking for a Republican who can win back the White House. I think it's time that we have that shift, and it's early days in the presidential election cycle, but I'm watching, as I think most Americans are right now, to look for all the candidates as they're putting out their ideas, and I'm looking for that Republican who can win back the White House.
You mentioned you have a series, or you have at least one television ad running that I've seen, and you mentioned standing up to China. Why is that important?
I think it has to do with our national security. It certainly has economic impact. And I think we have a lot of businesses here in Utah that are seeing the impact of Chinese hold on products and things, that services that they have been dependent on in the past. And we have to take very seriously China's potential aggression against democracy, democratic institutions around this world. And I think standing up against communism, standing up to friends of China. We're looking at the things that are happening right now in Ukraine with Russia. It's a time for us to stand strong against those aggressions.
We have about 30 seconds left. I would like to give that to you to make your one final push to any voters that are watching right now.
Well, I welcome all voters across this district to join our campaign. Join this movement of people, 13 counties wide, rural, urban, who are joining together. And you mentioned our TV ad. We're on TV. We've got mailers mailing out. We're on radio. We have fundraising that has been very robust. But most importantly, the thing that is bringing us into what we believe will be a positive outcome at the primary is this groundswell of grassroots support. Hundreds and hundreds of people who are doing all of the legwork of this campaign. So grateful for that. And for our shared vision, they're aligning with me, their hope in my ability to bring better leadership to D.C.
All right, we will end it on that note. We will be watching as we come down the stretch, just a few weeks left. I really appreciate your time. Thanks for being here with us.
Thank you.
Still to come, more on the race to replace outgoing Congressman Chris Stewart. Bruce Huff also hoping to get that job. We'll check in with him a little bit later. But first, the one-year anniversary of the Inflation Reduction Act, what both sides are saying about it after the break. A tense funding debate could be on the horizon in Congress. The president requesting Congress quickly pass a $40 billion package. It includes billions for Ukraine. Washington correspondent Raquel Martin with that story.
The Biden administration wants Congress to send another $24 billion to Ukraine.
I urge Congress to pass this legislation funding, the supplemental funding, right away.
Right now, Ukrainian forces are struggling to regain territory captured by Russia. Tuesday, Secretary of State Antony Blinken said the funding is vital and would include $13 billion in defense aid and another $8 billion in humanitarian aid.
We've ensured that Russia's invasion remains a strategic failure.
The Ukraine aid is just one portion of the president's roughly $40 billion request to Congress. After a tumultuous year of deadly wildfires, record heat, and storms, the White House is also asking for billions to replenish the nation's disaster relief fund and to improve border enforcement.
We'll continue to engage with members of Congress.
Monday, the White House said it remains confident the package can pass, despite a growing number of Republicans now pushing back on aid to Ukraine.
This has been done in a bipartisan way, and we believe that this will continue in a bipartisan way.
In a recent tweet, Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene criticized the president's priorities, saying, quote, giving $700 to the poor people who lost everything in the Lahaina fire, but wants to send another $20 billion to Ukraine. Greene is one of 70 House Republicans who voted to block additional aid to Ukraine last month and is expected to put up a fight once Congress returns in September. In Washington, Raquel Martin.
It's been a year since the Inflation Reduction Act was passed, and Wednesday, President Joe Biden was in Wisconsin discussing the economic impact of those policies. Washington correspondent Alexandra Limon has that story.
In Milwaukee Tuesday, President Joe Biden pointed to falling inflation as a sign that the American economy is strong.
It's just about 3% now. It's predicted to go lower than that. We're near the lowest point in over 2 years.
The president says his policies and legislative victories led businesses to make huge investments that he says are bringing back jobs and higher wages in industries like manufacturing.
We pay for low-wage workers has grown at the fastest rate in 2 decades. Wages are growing faster than inflation. Folks, that's Bidenomics.
Health and Human Services Secretary Javier Becerra says the Inflation Reduction Act, which was passed a year ago, is also helping Americans' bottom lines in many other ways, like capping the price of insulin for seniors on Medicare.
That is going to have a major impact on your pocketbook. At the same time, we know that there are millions of Americans who have health insurance for the first time ever.
The administration says that while the biggest impacts of the Inflation Reduction Act are still to come, people are already reaping the benefits.
Knowing that you can afford to buy your meds rather than forego paying your rent.
In Washington, Alexandra Limon.
Coming up on Inside Utah Politics, we're going back to the race for the Republican nomination in Utah's 2nd Congressional District. We're checking in with Bruce Huff after the break.
watching Inside Utah Politics.
We continue to profile candidates for the GOP special primary in Utah's 2nd Congressional District. Bruce Huff, one of 3 candidates on the ballot, here to discuss his campaign. Bruce, great to have you back on the show. Always glad to have you with us.
Nice to be here, Glenn.
Different capacity this time around.
Yes.
So let's get into that. But before we actually get into your interest in the position, let's talk a little bit about background and resume. What is it that you feel brings you to this point that makes you ready to go to work in Washington?
You know, really, I think it's a lifetime of business experience that has taught me what it means to have a budget and to live by it. And when we look at Congress and we look at the state of the federal government today, they need some help on actually doing budgets and following them. So spending is a big part of the reason I'm in this race. I have 10 children, I have 22 grandchildren, and we have a $34 trillion debt. And that sort of speaks for itself in terms of my motivation, because I'm worried about the promise of America really being lost to not just my children and grandchildren, but to all those in this district and in the state.
Yeah, that's a number most of us can't even comprehend if you really start to look at it deeply. You also have some experience within the Republican Party. Talk about that.
I do. I spent as a volunteer, but elected positions. I've actually won 5 caucus conventions in this state. 2 as chairman in the early 90s, and then later I spent 12 years serving the state as a representative of the state on the Republican National Committee, where I've served most of the time on the executive committee and have been involved in national conventions for many, many years.
Going back to the deficit and just the way things are working in Washington right now. You look at that, and most people would say that's a pretty daunting task to go there and try to make a difference. So why are you interested in trying to go there in a time where there's really a lot of gridlock, the atmosphere in Congress, a lot of vitriol going on right now? Why would you be interested in taking that on?
Well, first of all, I think what I bring from my background in business and politics and in the public sector, where I've done nonprofit work, is I like people, and I think what we need to do is get to a point where we try to understand each other, understand their values and their interests, take away kind of the positions for a minute and really get to know people in a way that we can develop some trust. And so I really believe that there's a lot of productive conflict that can take place in Congress, but you need someone who's had the experience of negotiation and leadership in a business setting, who can go head-to-head and toe-to-toe with the folks back there. I'm not an attorney, and I'm not a career politician. This is an opportunity to try something new and to say, okay, look, let's focus on the solutions, not on the problems so much. And I think if we do that, and we do it in a way that's respectful, where we do not have contempt or vitriol for another person, but we respect them, and we use that kind of respect and kindness in our dealings with people. I'm not naive. It's a cage fight, but I think we can also be much more congenial in the way in which we do it. I like to think of the Orrin Hatch approach, who was a very dear friend, and the senator was able to get along and do things with a polar opposite in philosophy, and that was Ted Kennedy.
Right.
And I think we can do that. I think we can regain some of that effectiveness in Congress if we work at it.
You don't live in the district. There was an opening for the district you live in back in 2020. So why did you look at this opportunity and say this is the time?
Well, this was
as opposed to a couple years ago.
This was the time because I didn't have any ecclesiastical business or family issues that would have prevented me from doing it. And number 2, let me just say that 5 of the last 9 congressmen elected in this state actually were elected outside their district. It's not the zip code. It's what you do in the district. And I actually live closer to the district on the north side than anyone from the south side does by many, many hours. And so the reality is, I love what goes on in our rural counties. When I was the chairman of the party, in fact, I spent a lot of effort to make sure on redistricting that there was a rural and an urban component to it, because we're a small state. we have 4 representatives. They need to be completely aligned on the issues for the entire state, not just an urban area or a rural area. But if everybody has a combination of those, then we can serve the state better and each of those districts better, because it really is about population, not about geography, in terms of the allocation of a congressman to a state.
I want to get into some of your top priorities if you were to be elected. You already mentioned one of them, and that is the debt. Talk about the impact of the debt. One, like, that trickles down as far as people being able to really even get by these days. But talk about the impact of it and what you would do to try to tackle that. Yeah.
So this is a problem, and it's a bipartisan problem. Republicans and Democrats have simply overspent. When the economy is go, 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 it seems like you can just spend, spend, spend. Unfortunately, when the economy isn't go, 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 they're still spending. In fact, we've had more spending in this last presidency with additional COVID related spending programs that were simply unnecessary, and I definitely would have voted against those. We have to slow the ship of state down. We have to get to at least a 1% growth rate so the economy can actually grow at a faster rate so that we can actually reduce the debt. I mean, just in the time that you have this show today, I think it's a 30-minute show, we'll have increased the debt by $50 million. That is a crazy amount of money. It is. And so what we need to do is I mean, the thing that it's kind of a correlated thing. Government and regulatory overreach is another major point that I'm concerned about. And a lot of that is they're spending money they don't need to spend, and in fact aren't even really authorized to spend, but Congress has sort of abdicated the responsibility to a regulatory agency. Taking on regulatory agencies where we have the BLM trying to do conservation leases in the state, taking away ranching and farming lands, it's a problem. And so I'm the one guy in this race, the one person who basically has taken on the regulatory state. I sued the FDA and won, and got them to go back to what their legislative mandate was.
Give us an idea of what committees you would be interested in serving on and how they would serve the 2nd District.
Well, for sure, one that I'm very interested in, it serves the state, and a lot of the employment in the northern part of the district is related to Hill Air Force Base. We do not have a member of Congress from our state on the Armed Services Committee. And from the very beginning, that's been a priority. I serve as an honorary commander at the 388th Fighter Wing. Love that relationship that I have with them, and they are the tip of the spear. I mean, if people don't understand what Hill Air Force is, boy, they are the tip of the spear, but they're also a huge economic impact on the state. So armed services would be number one. Certainly natural resources are natural. We have, John Curtis is associated with that one. So there are some others in the area of finance, for example. Anything that is appropriation oriented, I would love to be a part of, because I'd love to cut the purse strings on a number of these agencies.
Okay, we have 30 seconds left. What is your pitch to an undecided voter who's watching right now?
I think it's leadership. I think clearly what we have is someone who has been the leader and directed the activity, and I'm the only one who's really acted in a leadership role in a significant way. And so the real difference is, number one, I also have been a faithful and consistent conservative. I voted for Donald Trump in 2016 and 2020. My opponent, Becky, voted for Biden, and my opponent, Celeste, didn't vote at all. And I think those are judgment issues, and we need to make sure that we have the person with the leadership and right judgment in office.
All right, Bruce Huff, we are coming down the stretch very quickly. We appreciate your time this morning. Thanks so much for being here with us.
Thank you, Glenn.
Stay with us. We'll be right back with more Inside Utah Politics right after the break. We leave you now with a look at what's on the radar in the world of politics. Next week on this show, we will finish up our profiles of the 2nd District Republican candidates with Celeste Malloy. The primary election is Tuesday, September 5th, and the general is Tuesday, November 21st. Make sure to connect with me on social media or through email. Let me know what's on your mind and issues that are important to you. You can email me at InsideUtahPolitics@abc4.com. You can also follow me on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thanks so much for making us part of your Sunday morning. We hope to see you again next week as we go inside Utah politics.